When most people think about a goal, they think about understanding the steps they need to take to get to the goal. But it's not actually the steps that create the problem and get us stuck. It's what happens when it's time to take those steps. Coming up next on the Successful Women Think Differently podcast, I'm talking about something I call growth gaps. And it is the key to creating breakthroughs to getting to your most meaningful goals. So, we're taught that we have to set goals. And when we set goals, too often we actually set ourselves up for failure. Because the way we're taught to set goals is to just get clear about what it is that we want and, make it a SMART goal, which is very important. However, there's a missing piece because I bet there's a goal that you've had for some time and you haven't gotten to it yet. Can you think of one? Most of us can. That goal that feels elusive, that goal that you've tried to get to, somehow you get stuck. You know what you need to do, but maybe you're not doing it. And so the question is why? I mean, if reaching a goal is only about knowing what the goal is, making sure that it's specific and measurable and actionable and all of those things are so important, and yet you still don't get to it. What's the missing piece? So the missing piece is something I simply refer to as a growth gap. It's the way you need to grow in order to get to the goal. Because inevitably, if the goal is big enough, you will bump up against a growth gap. A way that you're going to have to grow in order to push past whatever is blocking you, whatever that obstacle happens to be. A few years ago, I felt like I had really bumped up against almost like a lid in my business. It was going very well, and I had reached the height of where I was going to go unless I got clarity about my own growth gap and then addressed it. So my growth gap had to do with learning some simple leadership principles and implementing them. I won't even say they were principles I didn't understand. It was that I wasn't actually acting on those principles, oftentimes because fear was getting in the way. And so what I have discovered in years of coaching and using positive psychology as a coach and studying what it is that successful women do differently, that if you want to get to a goal, it's not enough to understand what those steps are. You've got to understand your growth gaps. What is the way that you will need to grow in order to go where you most want to go? This is critical. And there are generally 4 types of growth gaps. I'm going to share with you what those are. The first one you can probably guess is simply fear. Whether it is your fear of failure and that feels too big, so you're not willing to risk that you might fail at the goal, you just won't go for it at all. Sometimes it's the opposite, that fear of success. I've talked to you about this on the podcast. The responsibility, the expectation, can I keep it up? There's a lot of pressure with succeeding to keep on succeeding. So sometimes that's the fear that gets in the way. Sometimes it is your fear of uncertainty, losing control, not knowing exactly how it's going to all play out. And if you don't know when it's going to happen, who it's going to happen with, exactly how things will unfold. If you are a control freak, if you don't like uncertainty, then it's highly likely that when it's time to take those steps, you will hesitate. And then, of course, there is fear of rejection, fear of disapproval. Your concern about what other people are going to think, what they're going to feel, what they're going to say, keeps you from doing the next thing you need to do. So oftentimes our growth gap is rooted in fear. Sometimes our growth gap is rooted in habits. It's just how we learned to do things, and that habit can get in the way. And so you may have some habits that are actually habits that are bad. You may have some habits that are missing Perhaps it's the consistency of your habits. You'll go in there and you will hyper focus for a period of time, and then everything just kind of drops off. And we all know this often happens at the beginning of the year when we get all excited about our goals and our vision. And you go in there in January and boy, you are at it. And then bam, you fall off. And often you fall off because of one of the other growth gaps, which is around distractions. So we are living in a world that is more distracted than ever. There is a whole industry around getting your attention. So much of that is electronic, the phones that stay literally within arm's length. The research shows 90% of our time, awake and asleep, our phones are within arm's reach of us. And that phone is your own personal computer in your hand. It is access to everything. And sometimes you simply can't avoid it. Your calendar is there. Maybe it's the key to your car is there. Your bank account is there. Your texting is there. Your email is there. Everything. Your audiobooks, your podcasts. I mean, everything is there. And so that phone can be super distracting. But sometimes it's others. Sometimes we simply have not cleared the clutter in our space. We have not cleared the time. We have not asked people to give us the space to do what needs to be done, whatever that next step is. And so sometimes the issue when it comes to your growth gap has to do with clearing out distractions. So fears, habits, and distractions are often the growth gaps. And then there's a fourth. Sometimes it's circumstances. So sometimes we have a gap because it's not the right season and we're trying to force something in the wrong season. Perhaps there is something else that really needs your attention in this season, and you're insisting that you need to reach the goal now, and yet you can't. It's not actually realistic. And so if you would change that expectation, you could possibly change the circumstance. Now, sometimes it's a circumstance that we have the control to actually set some smaller goals, right, to change our circumstance so that we actually can put ourselves in position to accomplish the goal. But whatever the case, your growth gaps are often rooted in fears, habits, distractions, and circumstances. So when you look at that goal that's super important to you now and it feels elusive, my question is, what is the growth gap that you will need to close in order to take the steps you need to take when it's time? There is something that's keeping you from getting to where you want to go. And if you get clarity about what that is, what you do is you create a growth goal that empowers your goal. Your growth goal is how you will grow in order to go where you want to go. If you miss that, you can literally set yourself up for failure. You can have a fantastic goal. You can have all the steps in the world. You could have broken those steps down into smaller sub-items. You could have thought of everything except have you addressed the thing that will get in the way and create an obstacle to you actually taking those steps. Because if you hesitate when it's time to take the step, if you won't have the conversation that needs to be had, make the phone call that needs to be made, step out of your comfort zone in the way you're going to have to in order to get to that goal, then it doesn't matter that you've got this big plan with all of these goals laid out if you won't actually walk in the plan, if you won't actually take the steps. The good news is, if you determine what the growth gap is and you make that a goal within the bigger goal, then you address the issue that needs to be addressed and you free yourself from being stuck. So that's it. Growth gaps. Oftentimes, we don't think about that. We just overfocus on the steps. We talk to the people who've been there and done that, which is great. And we ask them what they did. But just because they did it doesn't mean we'll do it. If our fears, habits, distractions, and circumstances get in the way. In the next episode of this podcast next week, I'm going to be talking about the power of a personal growth plan. It is essential that as you head into a season of achieving a vision that's important to you as we head into a new year, that you have a personal growth plan, not just a vision, not just a list of goals and steps, but a plan of action that will actually help you grow in the ways you need to grow in order to walk into that vision. And that's a big part of why I created something we simply call SWA, the Successful Women's Academy. It's actually a personal growth membership where every single month I address growth gaps, things that very easily can get in our way. Sometimes they are things we haven't thought of, but once our eyes are opened, we realize, oh, that's the shift I need to make. And the membership provides the support, the tools, the content, the guidance to be able to do that as I coach you month by month through the fears, the habits, the distractions, and the circumstances that threaten to get in the way of your biggest dreams. Sometimes they threaten to sabotage joy and really just keep you from being the best version of yourself. We talk about a lot of different issues. In fact, coming up, we'll be addressing some of these growth gaps as we head into our big vision board challenge that's coming up. But very importantly, there is a personal growth lesson every single month around closing your growth gaps, a virtual coaching session, a guided meditation, and then we do a live monthly call with members. The members call themselves Swisters, SWA Sisters. It's really, really fun. We gather each month to talk through those growth gaps and do a little Q&A. So I would love to invite you into the Successful Women's Academy membership. If you go to valerieburton.com /SWA, you'll find out about SWA, and you can even join. But also, we've got a free vision board challenge that is coming up in January that I'll be hosting. This is the 2.0 version because we did it this year and it was phenomenal. So now, if you did it last year, I'm helping you to take that vision board to the next level, tweak it for where you're going next. And if you didn't do it, I'm going to help you create your vision board to get you focused for this year. So you can learn about the Vision Board Challenge also at valerieburton.com /Vision Board Challenge 2024. So that's it. I wanted to talk to you about growth gaps because it's near and dear to my heart. When I discovered that personal growth was the key to making these changes, it changed everything. I kept almost, just beating my head up against a wall trying to figure out why can't I get to certain goals, only to realize I did not have the growth goals that would support my biggest goals. And I want you to get clear. What are your growth gaps? What are those goals? And I would love to support and coach you as you grow in the way that you need to grow in order to go where it is that you want to go. So thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the Successful Women Think Differently podcast. I'll talk to you next time.